Right now, I am standing in the very heart and center of Rio de Janeiro, one of the largest cities in the Western Hemisphere, the second largest city in the country of Brazil. Some 14 million people live here in Rio de Janeiro, one of the most beautiful natural settings of any major city in the world. There's an expression here in Brazil that on either the seventh day or the eighth day, I forget which one, God made Rio de Janeiro. It's truly a place of unimaginable beauty. So right now we are in I think it's called Praça 15 de Novembro, the 15th of November Square. I don't know what that is a reference to. In Latin America, they like to name a lot of things like after dates, like an important date. So maybe there's like a revolution here or something. But anyway, this is where the city began in 1565. Now, the history of Brazil begins in the year 1500. That's when Pedro Cabral founded or discovered Brazil, or what would become Brazil for the Portuguese. He, like Christopher Columbus, who had come to the Americas only 8 years prior for the first time, was looking for a quicker sea route to India and all of the spices and jewels there. But they found Brazil, and so they created this country. Brazil actually is named for a tree here. So anyway, behind me is it's called the Imperial Palace. Now this was originally built for a wealthy merchant in the early 1700s. It's many decades older than the creation of the United States. But in 1808, during the Napoleonic Wars, when Portugal was conquered by the French, and I do believe unified with Spain, and Napoleon put his brother on the seat of the throne of Spain, the royal family of Portugal actually fled here to Brazil. The British assisted them, and they actually fled here to Brazil. And so for the only time in European history, a European royal family, a European monarchy, moved from the home country to one of its colonies. And so for something like 13 years or something, the Brazilian royal family, the king, the queen, the prince, they were all here in Rio de Janeiro. Now, Rio de Janeiro is not the first capital of Brazil. That honor belongs to Salvador, a city in the north. But Rio de Janeiro became the capital of Brazil in 1763. Now, it ceased being the capital in, I do believe, 1960. That's when the capital moved to the middle of the country, the geographic center of the country. That's Brasilia. But until now, from 1763 until 1960, so for about 200 years, this was the capital of Brazil. Now, this building here was the house, like I said, of a wealthy merchant. But when the imperial family came here, they moved into this house. And this was their residence until they moved to fancier royal palaces. There's a couple of different royal palaces they use, but they're kind of a couple of kilometers. One famous one's a couple kilometers over there. It actually kind of got burned down in the fire. You know, Brazil, things don't always go according to plan. And then there's another famous palace a couple kilometers that way. And so that's where they moved. They used this as a administrative building here in the heart of the city, but they did live here for a long time. Now, after the Napoleonic era ended, Napoleon's defeated Waterloo, Portugal becomes an independent country again. The royal family returns back to Portugal, but the prince, he loved Dom Pedro I. He loved Brazil so much. He grew up here. He'd grown very fond of it. And he said, I want to stay here. I want Brazil to become independent from Portugal, and I want to be the king, the emperor. And so Brazilian independence from Portugal occurred in, I do believe, 1823. He was the emperor for something like 10 years. And then his son, Dom Pedro II, became emperor of Brazil. He's one of the longest running emperors, monarchs, kings in history. It was something like 57 years, crazy. He was the last monarch. In 1889, he was near death, and he was deposed because he had abolished slavery a year earlier. Brazil's actually the last country in the Western Hemisphere, the last, you might call, European country to abolish slavery. Slavery is still practiced in many parts of the world, but it ceased being practiced in the European world in 1888 when Brazil was the last country to ban it. But a lot of wealthy plantation owners in the north were upset by this development, and so they actually deposed the king. But he was very old at that point, and he probably didn't have much longer anyway. But yeah, so Brazil became a republic, became a quasi-democracy in 1889 because the men of always, the wealthy barons, they were upset over the ending of slavery. But anyway, so yeah, that served as kind of the imperial residence and then the imperial office until 1889. Now we'll do a little loop here in the in this square, standing in the shade. It's quite nice. It is 30 degrees right now, 30 degrees centigrade, which isn't so bad, but it's quite humid, and the sun is pretty strong, and so it's a fairly hot. It can be pretty hot if you're standing in the sun. Now anyway, we turn around here. You can see way in the distance there. It might be hard to see. That is the Ilha Fiscal. I don't know what that means in English. It's the island of something. And actually that was built by Dom Pedro II, one of his birthday celebrations. He built that there, very nice. Now over here, classical structure, this is the ferry terminal. Rio is actually on a massive bay, that's why it was built. Massive bay, great port. The bay, I believe, is called Guanabara Bay. Rio, actually, the very first European settlement here was actually by the French Huguenots, French Protestants, fleeing some measure of Catholic oppression. You know, the French monarchs, the French government wanted to maintain France as a fairly Catholic country. And so the French religious dissenters, the Huguenots, the Protestants, they came here. They went to many parts of the New World. Acadia, which is today the Maritimes in Canada, another famous place that the French Protestants went. They also came here and they established the first European presence, but they didn't last very long. The Portuguese took it back over and founded the city that we know today. But anyway, there's a ferry terminal. It goes over to Niterói. Niterói is the when Rio was the capital of Brazil from 1763 until 1960. Niterói was actually the capital of the state of Rio de Janeiro. But after the government moved to Brasilia, the government buildings that were used, you know, for say the Federal Congress became the Congress of the State of Rio de Janeiro. The presidential palace became the governor's palace, and all of that was transferred for Niterói to here. Now, Rio de Janeiro, if you come here to Rio de Janeiro, it's an incredibly beautiful city, but you'll notice there's a lot of problems here. There's a lot of poverty, there's garbage on the streets, a lot of beggars, people doing drugs, a lot of graffiti. There's a lot of urban problems in Rio de Janeiro. Now, this was particularly made famous during the Olympics, 2016, when they tried to hide a lot of the urban problems, building walls next to the highways to hide the favelas and, you know, things like this. And now, why did Rio de Janeiro decline? Well, when the capital moved to Brasilia, all the political money, the political power left. Then Sao Paulo, which is now the largest city in Brazil, and it's the largest metropolitan area in the Western Hemisphere. It's some 23 million people. When Sao Paulo became the economic capital, and that happened in kind of the mid-1900s, going into the late 1900s, Rio ceased being both the political capital of Brazil as well as the economic capital. And so a lot of the money left, and the people who stayed were the people who maybe didn't have the skills or the ambition to leave. And so the demography changed. The city became noticeably less European and became kind of more African, in a pattern repeating many cities that you might see in the United States, like Detroit or St. Louis or even Cleveland. And so the city has kind of declined. And you'll see that if you go here. It's an incredibly beautiful city, a really fascinating culture, but it is a city that there's a lot of visible decline. Now, we'll go this way, and we'll be ending pretty soon. We will end in front of what is called the Palacio dos Tiradentes. I don't know what that means in English. Palace of something. Palace of Tridents. I don't know, but it's a beautiful structure. And right now, it's probably pretty quiet. You're not hearing cars, you're not hearing buses. Now, the reason for that is there used to be a giant highway that went right along the bay here, but the highway was put underground. And so all of that car noise, all that bus noise is now underground. It's quite nice. We'll go here in front to the front of this palace, so you can see kind of the classical architecture of Rio, and you'll be able to hear all of the noise from the cars and the buses that really characterize Rio, because it's important to remember that this city is on the beach. It's incredibly beautiful, but there's a ton of noise because there's a ton of people. Now here, we'll go to the front of it, and then that's where we'll end. Yes, well, as we're walking there, what else is there to say? I covered pretty much everything. When the capital was moved to Brasilia in 1960, it was a very charismatic leader. His name was something like Kubitschek or something. And he wanted to put the capital of Brazil in the geographic center of Brazil so as to promote economic development in the heart of the country. And while that did succeed to an extent, it made the government very distant from the population center here in the southeast of the country. And so almost immediately after he moved the capital to Brasilia, the military took over the government in a coup and established a military junta that would lead Brazil for numerous decades. And Brazil only returned to being a democracy in, I think, like 1992, 1989, something like that. So the very last, the later years of the 20th century. And it kind of goes to show you that when you take the political center, the political capital of a country, and you move it far away from the people, that opens up the government to abuse, to corruption, to the consolidation of power, because there just isn't a population to protest, because it's just so far away from where the people live. Now, you can see behind me here, incredible. This beautiful palace. This was the Congress of Brazil. Now it's the Congress of the state of Rio de Janeiro. You can see the flag of Rio de Janeiro next to the flag of Brazil on the flagpole. And right next to it is a beautiful historic church. It's been there for many hundreds of years. This square, these buildings that I've been walking through, this square, older than the United States. I mean, we oftentimes forget when we travel through Latin America that Latin America was a more valuable prize, you might say, than the United States. And many of the first Europeans who came here to the New World didn't go to what would become the United States and Canada. They came here to Latin America. And so many of the buildings that you see, the old buildings, they're older than the United States itself, because the United States is actually relatively new in terms of the New World. Well, that'll wrap things up for now. I hope you enjoyed my little tour of the very heart and center of historic Rio de Janeiro. And until next time, ciao.